Hey everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. Some ISPs may have a challenge with low-cost broadband options that are required in BEAD. So this may make it more difficult for them to accept BEAD funding or to be profitable if they do. Be right back. Thanks for joining me, Rick Husey here with Broadband Deployment News. So I saw this post on Pots and Pans. This is a blog that Doug Dawson does. He's a broadband consultant. Does, I think, engineering work and other things for broadband providers. And he does, I think, work with smaller providers. Probably a lot of them happen to be in rural areas. So he has a pretty good take on this. He understands the market in those areas. So I wanted to look through this. And then also an article I saw on Broadband Breakfast about the requirements for a low-cost option. So you see here, BEAD pressure on broadband rates. State broadband offices and BEAD grant process have designed grant rules that put pressure on ISPs to provide inexpensive rural broadband, but in doing so, I'm not sure that they understand the high prices that rural folks are paying for broadband today. So he's kind of looking at it from the fact that prices are already really high there. But I think the more important takeaway is that low-cost broadband is going to be different things in different areas of the country. If you've got a urban area where you've got lots of people kind of crowded together, so it's lots of customers per mile, and you've got, because of that fact, you've got multiple ISPs there. So you might have a fiber operator, a cable operator, a fixed wireless operator, maybe others that are maybe an independent fiber operator. So you've got more people competing, more customers. Because there's more customers, you've got more people competing, more operators. And again, it's easier to deploy and less expensive to operate because you've got all those customers close together. So as you maintain that outside plant, you are able to impact lots of customers without driving too many miles. So going from customer to customer doesn't take long. Going from node to node doesn't take long sometimes, just because of the density of the area. That compared to a rural area where you may have many miles per customer, long runs. If you're going to do truck rolls for maintenance or installs, it takes a lot longer, more hours in that. So it's just more expensive to operate that plant, to deploy the fiber. So I think that's kind of the takeaway here. But he's saying, people don't understand how high these costs are in these rural areas. And you'd think that should say, yeah, we should have a low cost. It should be low cost in those areas too. But again, what is low cost in one area is different from another. To provide an example, my consulting firm, this would be Doug's consulting firm, just finished a statistically valid broadband survey in a rural county. Most of the rural folks in this county are already spending more than $100 per month on broadband. The incumbent telephone company has largely walked away from the county, and there's no DSL available in the most rural parts of the county. And of course, we know that even when DSL is available, it's not that good, not that fast. There's only one cell tower that's been upgraded to offer fixed wireless access broadband. That means most rural residents only have access to expensive broadband. So without DSL, and if they're not getting the fixed wireless, I think probably their only opportunity there would be something like Starlink and other satellite providers. There's one WISP that covers only a small portion of the county. The WISP's rates are high, with a 10 by 1 meg product for $76, and faster speeds cost more than $100. So 10 by 1, that's kind of your DSL worst speeds right there. So that for fixed wireless is not fast at all. You can get faster if you're going to pay more than $100. Cellular hotspots are expensive. For example, T-Mobile has hotspot plans that vary in price from 5 gigabytes of data for $20 to 50 gigabytes of data for $50. AT&T and Verizon have similar prices for hotspots. Those rates sound low until you realize the cost of buying broadband over the data caps. For example, Verizon offers 150 gigabytes of data for $110. And it doesn't say here how fast those speeds are. The data caps on hotspots put horrendous pressure on a household. OpenVault recently said that the average U.S. home uses 641 gigabytes of data per month. It's hard to imagine trying to restrict a home to using less than 100 gigabytes per month to keep the bill under $100 per month. And, you can. I mean, what's changed about the internet is the content and how many bits flow. And obviously, if you're going to do your basic surfing and email and those kinds of things, you can keep the usage low. But most people today are using it for video streaming, which takes a lot of bits going down the pipe. So those people that have these slow speeds may be able to keep the amount of usage down, but they're not able to use their broadband certainly to its fullest extent, and certainly not for entertainment purposes, being able to stream TV versus, let's say, getting something over cable TV or satellite. During the pandemic, I talked to several parents of students working from home using a hotspot who were paying more than $500 per month through extra bandwidth fees to get the same kind of bandwidth that homes with unlimited bandwidth take for granted. And of course, during the pandemic, people were having to do streaming because they were doing online learning, so they were having to do Zoom calls, those kinds of things. Satellite broadband is mostly over $100. Starlink prices start at $110. Usenet advertises unlimited data, but their plans have data caps for all practical purposes. For example, a plan with 200 gigabytes of priority data costs $110. They label the plan as unlimited usage, but data usage above 200 gigabytes again, is choked to extremely slow speeds. All plans require a 2-year contract. So you get locked in for 2 years. You can use up to 200 gigabytes, but after that, it's probably really slow. And it's probably not really fast to begin with if we're talking about use, because that's a geosynchronous satellite that's way up there. The speeds aren't going to be as fast as Starlink, and certainly the latency is going to be much more on a geosynchronous satellite. I don't think Hughes has low Earth orbit satellites. Viasat, another satellite company, is even more expensive. For $120 per month, the customers get 100 to 150 gigabytes of high-speed data and then unlimited choked and slow broadband. 500 gigabytes of usage is $250 per month. So again, that's I think a geosynchronous satellite, so I don't know what the speeds are on that. A lot of times those satellites might deliver 50 meg down and not much up compared to, let's say, Starlink that could do over 100 megabits per second download, and then I think maybe 20 megabits per second up. On Starlink, I can't recall, but it's somewhere in that neighborhood. There are state BEAD rules that are trying to force rates down to rates between $50 and $75 per month for gigabit speeds. And that is a good price. Here in the city, you pay $80 for a gigabit plan. And I see in the city, and city of Atlanta and the outlying metropolitan areas. And that's with multiple competitors. That's with Comcast, that's with T-Mobile doing fixed wireless, that's with AT&T. So 50 to 75, and again, he's talking about a rural area here where you don't have multiple competitors possibly that are vying for the business. You've got, again, could be many customers or many miles per customer, and could be geographically challenging on top of that. So yeah, it doesn't make sense to say in an area like this, you have to have a $50 to $75 per month price for a gig. The rates the broadband offices are seeking are typically far cheaper than what the large cable companies charge. The companies that have the most customers in almost every state, it's hard to think of a reason why grant offices, by the way, this is how he sees the faults here of this thing. So again, the rates of broadband offices are seeking typically far cheaper than what the large cable companies charge. Companies that have the most customers in almost every state, that's the large companies. It's hard to think of a reason why grant offices want rural rates to be lower than urban rates, particularly when operating costs are higher in the rural areas. They can be much higher. The low rates don't acknowledge that rural residents are already paying a lot more for inferior broadband. Do we really need to cut what folks are paying in half if they're going to upgrade from crappy broadband? So, yeah, there's something to be said there. When people, people want better broadband, and even when they were paying more for Starlink, interestingly enough, they were thrilled because suddenly they got, wow, I can do all kinds of things on my connection, my broadband connection through their satellite. Their Starlink satellite. So they were willing to pay the higher amounts. And now you're saying, well, we're going to give them even better broadband, let's say fiber, and we're going to lower the cost. Well, it's great if you can do that, but you need to keep the cost to an area where the operator can make money. They understand the rates necessary to win BEAD would create a losing business plan. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed this part. So the high rates are counterproductive. I think he means the low rates, I think. He says, I talked to an electric co-op this week that has zero interest in BEAD grants due entirely to the insistence on low rates. They understand the rates necessary to win BEAD would create a losing business plan. So right there, you've got an electric co-op, which is the perfect organization to be able to provide rural broadband in areas that are not covered because they already have infrastructure going out to every single location in the form of power lines. So they're already customers of that electric co-op, and they can go ahead and provide broadband, but they can't do it, at the cost that would be required here. So these guys, here's an electric co-op that says we're not interested in BEAD because of that. Probably the most important is that the IIJA, that's the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act legislation, strictly forbid the NTIA and the states from using the grants for setting rates, and yet states are openly doing it anyway. Why isn't the NTIA rejecting these rate plans? And I wanted to show what it is that is in there as far as rates. So you see here, this is the, let's see, can I make this bigger? Yeah, I can. So this is out of the Notice of Funding Opportunity on page 66 under Service Obligations and Affordability and Low-Cost Plans. So the Infrastructure Act's BEAD provisions are premised on Congress's determination that accessible or access to affordable, reliable, high-speed broadband is essential to fulfill participation in modern life in the U.S. Accordingly, each eligible entity, that would be each state or the territories, must include in its initial and final proposals a middle-class affordability plan to ensure that all consumers have access to affordable, high-speed internet. We expect that the states will adopt diverse strategies to achieve this objective. For example, some eligible entities or states might require providers receiving BEAD funds to offer low-cost, high-speed plans to all middle-class households using the BEAD-funded network. In other words, they would set a low-cost plan for everyone. That would be if you're rich or poor or middle class or whatever. They'd have a low-cost plan, and what that is kind of debatable. And again, it's going to vary. What you can actually do is going to vary if you are in a more densely populated area versus a very rural area. Others might provide consumer subsidies to defray subscription costs for households not eligible for the ACP or other federal subsidies. Now, the ACP at this point is dying a slow death, well, quick death now, because they've got funds now that will pay service providers through April. And then in May, if the service providers are still offering the ACP, they're only going to get a partial, like $16 instead of $30 per month. So the ACP will be done in May unless by some miracle it gets funded between now and then. And that looks much less likely now because we just had the budget extension that went through, and the ACP was not in that. So I think the ACP is probably history at this point, at least for the rest of the year through the election and maybe past that, depending on who wins. Again, the ACP is mentioned here, but it could be there'd be other federal subsidies. Maybe the FCC will do something with USF to be able to address affordable broadband. We don't know. But in any event, they're expecting that, they're saying that one thing the states could do would be to offer some kind of a subsidy themselves, maybe through some of the BEAD funding that they get if they have BEAD funding extra left over. But of course, that would only last so long. So I'm not sure there. Others may use their regulatory authority to promote structural competition. And that could be an open access network, for example, if it's a municipality that or the states could go ahead and favor municipalities that are providing open access networks. And I think that's in the NOFO as well, as that is something that is encouraged. And therefore, you have one network with multiple providers that would be competing over it. So you don't have the cost of the network being borne by the ISPs. But of course, the ISPs have to make money, and they're going to have to pay somewhat back to fund that network, as well as their other activities like marketing and billing, those kinds of things. And then others may use their regulatory authority to promote structural competition. Oh, I just said that. And then some might assign especially high weights to selection criteria relating to affordability and or open access. Yeah, there it is, in selecting BEAD subgrantees. So in other words, really kind of putting the thumb on the scale to say, your bid will be, the state would be saying this, your bid will be scored higher if you have a lower price point that you're going to provide, or if you're doing open access, or both maybe, and others might employ a combination of these methods or other methods not mentioned here, et cetera. So, and then we've got a second part here where it talks about the ISPs. In addition, the Infrastructure Act requires that each subgrantee, that would be the ISP, receiving BEAD funding to deploy network infrastructure receiving BEAD funding to deploy network infrastructure offer at least one low-cost broadband service option. Each eligible entity must consult with the Assistant Secretary of the NTIA and prospective subgrantees regarding a proposed definition of the term low-cost broadband service option. Each state shall therefore or thereafter submit a proposed definition to the Assistant Secretary for approval, and its final proposal. The Infrastructure Act directs the Assistant Secretary to define the subscribers eligible for such low-cost plans. So there it's saying that each subgrantee or ISP or operator that gets this BEAD-funded network must have this at least one low-cost option that's available. And then that's as part of enforcement, if the subgrantee or the ISP fails to comply with the low-cost broadband service option requirement set out in the Infrastructure Act, the Assistant Secretary may take corrective action, including a recoupment of funds from the subgrantee. So they could take back the funding that was awarded by the state in that case. So that is pretty interesting. So back to here. I think that's it. So this is one more issue that I find ironic about the BEAD process. The Department of Commerce and NTIA have repeatedly said that BEAD grant rules are conservative to protect taxpayers. However, putting tremendous pressure on ISPs to have low rates does the exact opposite and will put ISPs at risk for failure after taking the grant funding. There seems to be an underlying assumption that ISPs have unlimited and hidden profit reserves that can absorb whatever penalty grant folks want to invent. That may be somewhat true for a few giant ISPs, but it sure isn't true about everybody else. So again, the takeaway here is looking at rural ISPs and their situation as far as cost structure versus the larger, bigger companies that have more resources just by virtue of their size, plus the fact that they tend to operate in areas that are less expensive to be able to provide service. And this is counterproductive, in my opinion, to the goal of BEAD, which is to get broadband to every single person in the country, every single household and business. And if you are, this electric co-op that doesn't want to accept BEAD funding, if it's because of the fact that there are onerous, low-cost requirements on here, then you are not adhering to, again, what the goal of BEAD is, which is to deploy broadband and not necessarily affordability, which should be secondary. The primary thing should be getting broadband everywhere. And then secondarily, trying your best to make sure that in each area, everybody has a low-cost option, but that low-cost option will be different based on the costs of the internet service provider. There's no way to get around that. So I also wanted to look at this other story this was in Broadband Breakfast. House Democrats urge NTIA to prioritize affordability for BEAD. And you see this this partisan divide on affordability between Democrats and Republicans. Democrats want the government to come in and say, this is the price. They would like the government, actually, lots of Democrats, and it's moving more in this direction, would like the government just to say, everybody gets broadband and it's going to be free and everybody's going to pay taxes to pay for that broadband. So it will be just a free service that everybody gets. That would be what a certain wing of the Democrat Party would like. I'm not saying everybody, but some would prefer that. Let's just give everybody broadband and it would be free, or we'll just give everybody broadband and be a very low price and be very highly subsidized and it'll be paid through taxpayer money. Whereas on the Republican side, again, you've got various wings of the Republican Party, but the general consensus would be let the market action take care of that. So you want to get broadband out there, and you want some competition to be able to take care of that. And in some cases, that is a problem in some of these rural areas, is that you don't have good competition. That's changing with 5G as you get mid-band spectrum 5G from people like T-Mobile and Verizon and AT&T out there. That could be a reliable, viable competitor to, let's say, a fiber operator or a cable operator that has had in the past a lock on a territory, where they could charge whatever they wanted and provide maybe not the best service, because what are people going to do? Maybe they could go to Starlink, but that's really expensive. But if you have a fixed wireless operator out there that's national provider may be doing that, then that's another competitor in the mix that the cable operators and fiber operators need to be thinking about. So that can help keep prices down, and that can help improve service, because you don't want people to leave for either really higher price or poor service. So I'm just going to read a couple of things in here. So all 12 Democrats on the House Communications and Technology Subcommittee wrote on Tuesday to the NTIA, urging the agency to prioritize affordability as it manages its $42.5 billion broadband expansion program. The NTIA's mechanism for doing that is its policy requiring states, the entities ultimately awarding grants under the BEAD program, to ensure participating providers set up an affordable option for low-income households. The agency can consult with states to ensure their low-cost provisions are satisfactory before approving BEAD implementation plans and allowing programs funds out the door. Louisiana, the only state to have its BEAD proposal fully approved by the NTI, set its baseline low-cost option at $30, effectively providing free internet for low-income consumers and stable revenue for providers should Congress act to refund the ACP or a successor program. So it will not be free unless Congress does that, but still it's $30 a month on the low-cost side. And that's in Louisiana. The state will give applicants room to raise low-cost plans to $65 if necessary for the financial sustainability of a project. So that right there is key as well. So they're saying $30 is our target. However, if you can justify, and I'm assuming this has to be justified, I haven't looked at the plan in detail, but if you can justify that your costs are higher because you are having to go through a bog in Louisiana to get broadband to, this small number of homes, then, you can raise that low-cost plan up to $65 if necessary to be able to sustain that infrastructure. The agency has shown a preference for Louisiana's approach in response to a draft proposal from Virginia, which would require providers to propose and justify their own low-cost plans. The NTIA has asked for something stronger. The agency must be able to determine, and this is a quote from the letter from the Democrats, the agency must be able to determine the impact to a customer at the initial proposal stage. It isn't enough to know as of the final proposal. Thus, the low-cost option must be established in the initial proposal as an exact price or formula, it said in a letter to the state. And again, that's a big ask when you're talking about an initial proposal and all of the varying costs that you can have depending, in one state. You could have, Georgia, like where I live. You got Atlanta, you got North Atlanta, the metro area. You got Macon. These are larger metro areas. Then you've got, farm areas, and you've got mountains where you've got much higher cost structures there than you do in an area where I live, and certainly in the area like the city. So it doesn't make sense to try to put all this in the initial proposal. I think it makes more sense to have guidelines in there and work it out based on those details. And the other thing that this does, by the way, again, is that this is not looking at the goal of the BEAD program, which is to get broadband everywhere, primarily, and then secondarily to try to put in things in place to provide some competition, and then also to be able to provide some affordable plans, to make sure that there's at least an affordable plan based on that area. That should be secondary. But if you're trying to put all this stuff ahead of the cart ahead of the horse, so to speak, the pricing part ahead of the broadband, then you're going to ruin the whole project. For their part, Republicans on the Communications and Technology Subcommittee have accused the NTIA administrator, Alan Davidson, of violating the law by pursuing strong affordability policies. So, neither side's going to be happy, which a lot of times means it's just right. So maybe like, for example, the Louisiana thing that the NTIA said they like, maybe that's the right thing, which is you have a low-cost option, you've got some leeway for these higher-cost areas. So again, if you've got two sides complaining, sometimes the middle ground is actually the right ground. The Infrastructure Act bars the NTIA from regulating broadband rates in its role as BEAD administrator. For Republican members of the subcommittee, signing off on state plans with specific low-cost requirements crosses the line. And that would be if it says, depending on those plans, if the plan says, every provider in the state must provide a 1 gig plan and it must be $30 or it must be $50 or something like that. That, to me, is stepping over the line. That's the government saying what a service provider can charge. So I think there's a valid complaint in there. As we said before, NTIA's approval of state plans that include rate regulation is NTIA regulating rates in violation of the IIJA, they wrote in a December 15th letter to Davidson. So again, that's the Republicans. So Republicans had their letter, Democrats had their letter, and the two, again, they're on different sides of the fence on that. So they obviously, have different goals in mind. With the Democrats thinking government should be more involved in pricing and rate regulation, and Republicans thinking that it really should be up to the market, basically. Capitalism, market forces, those kinds of things. So somebody's watching from Thailand. Good morning. Hope you're doing well. It's the Economy Fan 98. Welcome back. I read my state's broadband plan. I read my state's broadband plan through BEAD keeps getting rejected because they can't impose a low-cost plan on ISPs. Doing so is illegal here in Virginia, so I don't know how the state is going to get BEAD funding. I see that it's one of the articles you read. Yeah, so there is. And I didn't look into detail on that, but it sounds like that's kind of the give and take of this. So as Virginia. They put their plan out there, then NTIA gives them feedback on, hey, this doesn't work right on the low-cost option, so you need to fix that, and then they'll come back, they'll fix that, and eventually it'll be approved. And all of this is the BEAD funding. I know you're waiting on RDOF because in your area, and hopefully, I think it was Charter. So in your area, hopefully the service provider that won RDOF is not going to be throwing up their hands and saying, we're not going to do this. Or if they do, hopefully they do that quickly so that BEAD funding can then be allocated there. But I know you're waiting on RDOF funds to get broadband in your area. But if not, BEAD would cover it. It's just the state will have to figure out how to do that if the RDOF money does get pulled from there, if the service provider that got it decides they're going to relinquish that. So, eventually, Virginia will get this worked out, as will other states. So the NTI is looking at each plan. And one of the things they're looking at is how the low-cost option is going to work in that plan. So again, you've got two sides basically arguing different points. And in the middle, there's that middle ground that I think the NTIA is trying to work in. And, I think that makes sense if they're going to do that. I'm sure there's going to be some things that neither side likes and some things that both sides do like. So we'll see where it goes from there. Thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it. And if you like this, if you give me a like on the video, wherever you happen to be, including Thailand, if you give me a thumbs up, I'd appreciate it. And if you have not subscribed to our channel, go ahead and click the subscribe button down on YouTube, down in that direction. And when you do, you'll have an option to click the bell. And when you do that, you'll be notified when I am live with streams like this one. So hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.